The Prime Minister has declared that Australia will continue to back Ukraine in the wake of the extraordinary Oval Office confrontation. Anthony Albanese says Ukraine is standing up against authoritarianism and it's an easy choice for Australia to continue giving its support. But the schism between Europe and the US over the war in Ukraine reveals the way the global order has shifted, with stark implications for Australia. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts joins us now. Hi there, Stephen. So the Prime Minister and now the opposition leader making it clear this morning that Australia isn't going to abandon Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right, Ros. There's a real sense of bipartisanship around this, both the coalition and the government, as you say, making it very clear over the last 48 hours that they continue to back Ukraine. Now, Anthony Albanese hasn't directly criticised President Trump in any way. He's still reluctant to really offer any opinion on his conduct or what happened in the Oval Office. But he told Cabinet this morning that Australia continued to stand with Ukraine and would continue to provide support, saying it was critical for Ukraine to be able to end the conflict on its terms. And as we just heard from Peter Dutton, he in some ways went a bit further than the Prime Minister, as you mentioned, saying he was disappointed by the scenes in the Oval Office. Again, without directly criticising perhaps Donald Trump directly, making it very clear that in the coalition's view, the White House approach to this is in the wrong. Now, let's take a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say on this, speaking to his Cabinet early this morning.
We regard this as an issue of doing what's right, but also what is in Australia's national interest. The brave people of Ukraine, led so extraordinarily by President Zelensky, are fighting not just for their national sovereignty and for their democracy, they are fighting for the international rule of law. And it is an easy choice that Australia has made. It's a bipartisan position that Australia has had. We've contributed $1.5 billion of support, $1.3 billion of which is military support.
So, Stephen, does the gulf between Australia and the Trump administration on this issue create any major difficulties for the alliance?
Look, not when it comes to Ukraine, in the sense that Australia is still a real distance from the action here. Unlike the UK, France and Germany, the conflict in Ukraine doesn't have direct and immediate regional security implications in the way that it does for European powers. It does have broader implications in terms of the lessons that other states in particular might draw from the conflict in Ukraine, particularly if Putin can emerge victorious with large swathes of land or other things that he can tout as proof of that victory. But it's not critical to Australian security in quite the same way that it's critical to European security. And Trump's ire is more likely to be focused on those European leaders who are at the centre of this particular schism rather than Australia. So yes, Australia and the US are at variance on Ukraine, but it's probably unlikely to have immediate implications for the direct bilateral relationship. Although, of course, what it reveals about the US today under Trump does have broader implications for Australia's own security.
All right, so what do these seismic shifts in US foreign policy under Mr. Trump mean for Australia?
Well, where to begin, Ros? It's a tricky question and it's not an easy one to answer. What we're seeing at the moment in the US, in the UK and in Europe is a real sense of shock, visceral shock about what President Trump is doing and saying, and a real doubt that's emerging not just in NATO but also in the US's willingness to continue to provide any sort of security guarantee to Europe, which is why you have some people like the new German Chancellor talking about, quote, real independence from the US. Now, of course, Australia is not in quite the same position. We're in a different part of the world, and perhaps, unfortunately for Australia, we don't have many options in the way that the Europeans perhaps do. We don't have anything like the EU, an immediate social and political union which we can fall back upon. Not only that, our isolation and our relative smallness of size means that we remain at this point pretty heavily reliant, really very heavily reliant on US technology and defence weight for our national security. There's no other power that can simply sub in. And then, of course, there's the final question about exactly what Donald Trump's sympathy or seeming sympathy for some authoritarian regimes might mean for our immediate region as well. when Australia's looking at this, there are two, broadly speaking, schools of thought. One school of thought is basically that the US will probably look to remain a resident power in the Pacific and that there is no reason for Australia to panic. This is a point that Peter Dutton made just then. James Patterson, the coalition frontbencher, made the same point on the weekend, saying unlike Europe, which is something that Donald Trump regards as a distant theatre, the US regards itself as a resident power in the Pacific, and it regards the competition with China as a key strategic priority. So they don't expect to see US retrenchment from the region. Others, though, including in the Australian establishment, are less sure. There's deep anxiety about the fact that Donald Trump continues to talk about the big, beautiful ocean between the US and Europe and the war with Russia. There's anxiety about the possibility of a grand bargain being struck between the US and China that may leave other allies in Asia out in the cold. And there's deep uncertainty about the way that raw transactionalism is now at the heart of so much US diplomacy, illustrated most powerfully, of course, in that exchange over the weekend in the White House. And some people in that camp say that there is an absolute need for Australia to bolster its independent defence deterrence as rapidly as possible. Now, this debate is going to play out over the election campaign and out over the next few years and decades. There are no easy answers, but there is no doubt that the schism we are seeing between the US and Europe over Ukraine does reveal some sharp and stark choices that Australia is likely going to have to make over the coming years.